If you want to tell better stories, whether that is improving your social media or writing a character that your audience just can't stop thinking about, there is one thing you have to do. And I'm going to be honest with you, it takes a lot of guts. You have to show weakness, not manufactured bullcrap, real, honest, genuine, painful weakness. Have you ever met somebody that you just can't trust because they act like they have it all together? This is so big in the healing space and the guru world. I think folks are so afraid that they will lose credibility, that people won't trust that they know what they're talking about if they're honest about their own shortcomings, their fears, their weaknesses. And as a result, it creates this very plastic persona that people just cannot get behind. And honestly, actually repels folks, sometimes even makes them hate you because they know it's BS. Now we know this whole authenticity movement is really popular, but how exactly do we share weakness and be vulnerable in a way that actually empowers folks, creates stronger connection, and doesn't just make everybody else feel dumped on? I interviewed 3 storytelling experts. The first one goes deeper into the why behind why weakness is so important to share. And the other 2 are very practical tips of things you can implement, whether it's your social media or your script, on how to bridge our humanity by sharing our weaknesses. This first clip comes from Lisa Cron, who is a storytelling coach and consultant. She says,
the key to all of it is vulnerability. In fact, the only way to make a character likable, we misunderstand likable. We think of likable as somebody who would never do anything in polite society that would make anybody feel even the slightest bit uncomfortable. And let's face it, those are the people we like the least, right? We either think they're so shallow, we can't believe it, or they've got somebody tied up in the basement and they don't want us to know, right? That is it. What likable means is relatable. Now that's too general. What does that mean? What it means is vulnerable. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. If you tell a story about yourself, if you tell a story about whatever it is, stories are about how something inside shifts in order to solve whatever the problem is or to make the point, which means if you want to use the binary, which I don't like using, but if you want to use the binary, which means you were wrong about something, you have to be able to admit that. I thought blah, blah, blah. And you might have a legitimate reason for having thought blah, 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 but it's wrong. And you have to admit to that in order to show us your progress into how you got to what I realized was. I think it's also why they say, if you want to convince someone, like, politically or in something socially, you want to get someone who's in there, for lack of a better word, tribe, who's gone through who they already trust, who can come and say, no, I really tried this and this was actually true. But it comes down to listening. It comes down to, can you frame what you want them to do based on something that matters to them?
Now, this next one is from director and screenwriter Steven Bernstein, who talks about building empathetic bridges. Now, he's framing this specifically for building characters, but I think there's some great implications here, whether you're writing a literal story or building your personal brand.
When the audience cares about characters, and that means vulnerability, and you have that combined with mystery, you have a film, and it will never fail. By empathic bridge, it's not going to core competencies, but incompetencies. When you see a middle-aged man like me in front of a mirror, and he's about to go out on a date, and you see him brushing his hair forward over his little bald spots and so on, and getting very nervous and straightening his tie and putting on too much aftershave, and then he goes off on a date, cut on a date with a woman who doesn't seem to like him that much. Who do you sympathize with that moment? Sympathize with the guy, because we've built the empathic bridge, because we've shown his vulnerability and his humanity.
Damn, that's so good.
And if he realizes, he said to his, had a phone call just before he goes out and goes, I'm so depressed. I can't find any reason for life. If this woman doesn't like me, then I give up. Now he's at this date and she doesn't like him. The mystery, what's he going to do? The empathic bridge, his humanity and his vulnerability. Will that film work? You're damn right it will work. because you've done those two elements. So action is great and important, but action about someone we don't care about, no engagement. Action with no mystery, there's nothing that advances us to the next stage. But when there's mystery, when there's uncertainty, when there's complexity, we as an audience want answers, and we will keep watching until the filmmaker provides it.
And next we have Renee Frojo, who is a brand and storytelling strategist, and she debunks something that we hear all the time: share from your scars, meaning only share things when you're healed from it. She actually says this could be something keeping your stories and your connections back, because actually we need to share from our wounds.
This sort of like canned advice and the questions around vulnerability and being raw, real, authenticity, like all these things. It's like sort of the canned advice is, I've said this a lot, it's share from the scar, not from the wound. Right? That you need a little bit of distance from something that's happened and some perspective so that you can turn that into a teachable lesson or a learning to share with somebody else. And that's what makes a valuable story. And I started seeing, I was like, is that maybe as a whole, like that's good advice, especially because the biggest reason that people don't share their story more freely and more openly and more often is because we're afraid, right? We're afraid of being taken out of context. We're afraid of being exposed. We're afraid of putting ourselves out there and getting a negative reaction because, it's attacking who we are or who we identify as and where we belong. So people are afraid already. And then I started seeing examples of people who were just not sharing from the scar, but like the gaping wound, And I saw it as so brave and courageous and like a moment of real raw vulnerability and authenticity that like is missing and that we all crave from the online space. And so I started just kind of studying how they were going about it and talking to these people and asking like, how's business now that you shared that you have a mental health disorder, right? Or that you have this diagnosis, or that like you're actually been in a lot of debt and are actually really bad with money, like how's business? And every single time I heard like business has never been better.
Who is a creator that is doing a really good job at building empathetic bridges, speaking from the wound, creating connection through their own messiness, but doing it in a way that does not lose credibility and authority. I know this is a tall order, but I'd love to hear who that is. If you're watching on YouTube, comment down below and let me know. Love you guys.